I never thought that trip would change everything. It was supposed to be just another weekend at the beach. Just me and my nephew. Daniel, my husband, Mark, was busy with work, like always. I had long stopped expecting him to be around. At this point, I was just used to doing things alone. Daniel had just turned 18. Tall, lean, with those deep brown eyes that reminded me so much of his father. He didn't talk much, typical teenager. On the drive there, he just stared out the window, earbuds in, lost in his own world. I glanced over at him and smiled. Time flew by so fast. I used to hold his tiny hands when he was little, guiding him across the street. Now, he was almost a man. When we got to the beach, I picked a quiet spot, far from the crowd. The sun was warm, almost too warm. I stretched out on the towel, feeling the heat soak into my skin. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Then, without thinking much, I reached for the sunscreen and handed it to him. Daniel, can you help me with this? I can't reach my back. He hesitated for a second but took the bottle. At first, it was nothing, just his hands moving across my shoulders, helping me like he always had. But then, something felt different. A silence settled between us. A kind of stillness that wasn't there before. And in that moment, I realized, something had shifted. If you had asked me years ago, I would have told you I had a happy marriage. But after 20 years together, things just faded. Mark and I weren't the same anymore. He was always working, always too busy. And me? I had gotten used to being invisible. I used to love him so much. We had late-night talks, spontaneous road trips, movie nights where we'd curl up on the couch for hours. But now, we barely spoke. Our conversations were short, dry, just about bills, groceries, and the kids. That morning was just like any other. Mark rushed out the door, grabbing his briefcase, barely looking at me. He kissed our daughter on the forehead, then turned to me for a split second. Sorry, I'm working late again, he muttered. Probably won't make it this weekend either. I didn't even argue. I just nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. What was the point? I turned back into the kitchen. And that's when I saw Daniel, standing there, watching me. His eyes held something I couldn't quite read. Are you okay, Auntie? His voice was soft. I forced a smile. Of course, sweetheart, I'm fine. But I wasn't. And deep down, I think we both knew it. I was lying there, stretched out on the towel, just letting the sun soak into my skin. The sound of waves, kids laughing in the distance, it was peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. Like I wasn't a wife, or a mother, or anything else. Just me. I sat up and reached for the sunscreen. Daniel, can you help me with this? I can't reach my back. My voice was casual, natural. I didn't think twice about it. He hesitated for just a second, then took the bottle from my hands. At first, his touch was light, careful, like he was afraid of hurting me. I smiled to myself. It reminded me of when he was little. How he'd hold my hand so gently when we crossed the street. You can press a little harder, I murmured, my face resting on the towel. It's okay. He listened. His hands moved with more confidence, gliding over my shoulders, down my back. It felt nice. It had been so long since anyone had touched me like that. Longer than I wanted to admit. And then, something changed. I felt it. His hands, slowing down, lingering just a little too long. My breath caught in my throat. My mind screamed at me to say something. To move, to stop it before it went any further. But I didn't. I just lay there, eyes closed, heart pounding, pretending nothing was happening. The drive home was silent. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, his hands gripping his knees a little too tight. I kept my eyes on the road, pretending everything was fine, pretending nothing had changed. But it had. When we got home, I threw myself into chores, cooking, cleaning, folding laundry, anything to keep my mind busy. But no matter what I did, I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. His hands, the way they lingered, the way my own body reacted. I hated myself for it. That night, Mark came home late, as always. He walked in, looking exhausted, loosening his tie. He kissed my cheek out of habit, barely there. Barely real. Long day? I asked, hoping for something. Anything. He just grunted, already heading for the living room. I stood there for a moment, gripping the kitchen counter, staring at the empty space where he had just been. He didn't notice a thing. He never did. And then, I felt it. A presence. I turned, and there was Daniel, standing in the hallway, watching me. He didn't say a word. I should have told him to go to bed. I should have acted like nothing was wrong. Instead, I turned away, shut my eyes, and tried to convince myself that I hadn't just let something terrible begin. The days after that were strange. Daniel didn't avoid me. He didn't act awkward or distant like I thought he would. Instead, he stayed close, closer than before. His eyes lingered on me in a way I couldn't ignore. And the worst part? I didn't want to ignore it. Then, on Saturday morning, he walked into the kitchen while I was making coffee. "Do you want to go back to the beach?" His voice was casual, like it was just another day. I should have said no. I should have made an excuse. Found something else to do. But instead, I nodded. "Yeah, that sounds nice." The drive there was quiet. No music. No earbuds. Just the sound of the tires on the road and my heart pounding in my chest. When we arrived, the beach was emptier than last time. The sky was clear. The ocean calm. Everything looked normal. Everything should have felt normal. I spread out my towel, laid down, closed my eyes. But even with my eyes shut, I could feel it, his gaze. Watching me. I didn't ask him to put sunscreen on me this time. I couldn't. But it didn't matter, because something between us had already changed. And deep down, I knew, we were heading towards something neither of us could take back. After that day, everything felt different. I tried to act normal. I cooked. I cleaned. I talked to Mark about the usual things, bills, schedules, grocery lists. But inside, I was unraveling. Daniel didn't stay away. He didn't pretend nothing had happened. If anything, he got closer. Not in a way that anyone else would notice. No. It was more subtle than that. A lingering glance. A brush of his hand when he passed by. The way his presence seemed to fill up every empty space around me. Mark still didn't see it. Of course. He didn't. He was too busy. Too tired. Too disconnected from me to even realize that something inside me had shifted. One night, I was standing in the kitchen, staring into my glass of wine, lost in my thoughts. I didn't even hear Daniel walk in until he was right behind me. "Can't sleep?" His voice was low, familiar. I exhaled slowly. "No." Silence. Then, a step closer. "You feel it too, don't you?" I closed my eyes. My grip tightened around the glass. I should have turned around and told him to stop. I should have said something, anything, to make this go away. But I didn't. Because the truth was, I did feel it. And that terrified me more than anything else. It didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. Daniel was always there, close. Watching, waiting. When I was in the kitchen, he'd stand just behind me. Close enough that I could feel his breath on my neck. When I sat on the couch, he'd sit beside me, just a little too close. And I let him. I knew I should have stopped it. I knew I should have pushed him away. Told him it was wrong. Told him we couldn't keep doing this. But I didn't. One night, Mark was working late, again. Isa was already asleep. I was washing dishes, trying to clear my head. When I felt Daniel behind me, I turned around slowly. His eyes were already on me. "Donnie." He stepped closer. "I can't stop thinking about you." I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. "Daniel, we." But then I looked at him. And he looked at me. And whatever weak argument I had was gone. I should have told him to leave. I should have walked away. Instead, I whispered the one thing I shouldn't have. "I can't stop either." And in that moment, I knew, this wasn't going to end. I didn't recognize myself anymore. Every morning, I'd wake up, look in the mirror, and see a woman I didn't even know, someone who had lost control. Someone who had crossed a line she could never uncross. Daniel didn't pull away. He stayed close. Too close. And I let him. Mark still had no idea. He came home late, kissed me out of habit, sat in front of the TV like nothing in our world had changed. But it had. Everything had. I started avoiding Daniel. I told myself if I put distance between us, maybe this would stop. Maybe I could fix it before it got worse. But he didn't let me. He found reasons to be near me. A passing touch. A glance that lasted too long. A whispered word when no one else was around. And the worst part? I wanted it. I hated myself for it. I hated him for making me feel this way. But every time I tried to put up a wall, he found a way through it. I knew this couldn't last. Secrets like this never stay hidden forever. But I didn't know how to stop. And that was what terrified me the most. I know this won't last forever. Secrets like this, they always come out. And when they do, they destroy everything in their path. Daniel doesn't seem to care. Or maybe he thinks we can keep this hidden. Maybe he thinks I won't let it fall apart. But I know better. Every time Mark looks at me, I wonder, does he see it? Does he sense that something is off? Every time Issa laughs, I feel the guilt curl up in my chest like a snake. And every time Daniel touches me, I remind myself that this is wrong. That it has to end. But then he looks at me. And I forget. I've told myself over and over again that I need to stop. That I need to walk away before everything explodes. But the truth is, I don't know if I can. I don't know if I want to. And that scares me more than anything. So if you're listening to this, if you've ever felt this kind of loneliness, this kind of emptiness, let this be your warning. Don't let yourself get lost like I did. Because once you cross that line, there's no going back.